Next, we'd like to introduce Inga Zasada and Tom Walters, speaking on an update on fumigation trials in Washington raspberries.
All right. Thank you. Tom and I are going to tag team this, so we'll see how that goes. We have a timer, so it won't go super long. We'll try. We want to acknowledge Lisa and Jerry for their contributions to this effort, and we're going to give you an update on 2 trials that we have going that were both established in 2017. And our take-home message is right there: caps and tarps for better fumigation. There is a way that we can make fumigation work better for you, and I think we have a lot of good data to support those conclusions. All right, the first trial that we're going to talk about is where we looked at Vapam caps. So that's metam sodium for the control of nematodes. It's a shallow injection, 5 to 10 inches. It's relatively inexpensive compared to shank applied telone products or chloropicrin products. It can be highly effective. It controls nematodes, fungi, and weeds. But the question is, where does it work best? Where would you be able to apply this less expensive, potentially easier application method? So we actually did 2 trials. One was kind of in a sandy soil in Linden. The other one was on a heavier soil down in Everson. And we looked at these 4 different treatments. We were lucky enough with our grower cooperator to have an untreated check, which is sometimes a luxury for us. We looked at Vapam shallow applied, so again, 5 to 10 inches deep. Strike 60 was deep applied shank injected. So we looked at Strike 60. Strike 60 is a combination of 1,3-dichloropropene and chlorpicrin. So it's 40% 1,3-D, 60% chlorpicrin. And the reason that we shifted our focus in 2017 to Strike 60 is because there was a shortage of 1,3-D in the world. And there was a real concern that you guys weren't going to be able to use telone C35 anymore. So we wanted to look at the efficacy of Strike 60 up here. And then we had those combined treatments. So we did it at 2 different sites. And here I am collecting deep cores. We went into these 2 fields. We collected cores down to 3 feet. And then we looked at nematode distribution throughout the soil profile. And that's shown in the figure here. 2 different places, Cyper Road and Pole Road. Cyper Road's in Everson is that heavier soil. Pole Road is a sandy soil. And you can see very clearly that the way that nematodes are distributed vertically in soil varies quite a bit from field to field. In that sandy soil, they're all concentrated up in that top foot. And in that heavier soil, they go all the way down to 3 feet. So this is some of our nematode data. Unfortunately, Cyper Road, the nematodes disappeared. I have never had that happen to me up here when working on nematodes. They don't just disappear, but they did at Cyper Road, so we don't have any data for there. But at the Pole Road site, you can see very clearly over time on the x-axis, and these are nematode populations per gram of root, that we got really good control with our 3 fumigation treatments compared to our untreated control. And you'll see over time that nematodes come back, as we know they do. But certainly on the sandy soil where nematodes were shallow, we did a really good job with our fumigation treatments.
And this is what the plants looked like at those 2 locations. So the green bars here are at Pole Road, the place where Inga just showed you the nematode data, and the blue bars are at Cyper Road. That's the place where the nematodes just vanished. This top chart here is primicanes per hill. You know, that's one measure of how well the plants are doing. And you can see that there's not a really dramatic effect, although at Cyper Road, in general, we're getting more primicanes per hill. Also at Cyper Road, the primicane height, which is down here, you can see that the height was greater for all of the fumigated treatments, regardless of which one they were. And this was even in the absence of nematodes. So clearly there's something other than nematodes that's limiting the growth, and the fumigation treatments are having a benefit there. At Pole Road, we looked at primicane weight per 10 hills. You know, normally you don't get to gather up the primicanes from 10 hills and weigh them because that kills them, obviously. But in this case, the grower had decided that the winter damage was bad enough that we could take those, and we did. And we found that the weight was a bit more, not very much more, for all of the fumigated treatments again. Then when we looked in 2019 at vigor, we still, 2 years after fumigation, we're seeing effects on plant vigor from fumigation. So top chart, whole road, canes per hill, we're getting a small but measurable increase in canes per hill. And then looking at the average height of the longest canes, there's this same general trend, more vigor in the fumigated plots, less in the non-fumigated plots. Not a lot of differences between fumigation treatments though. So kind of the bottom line here is that in this case, the Vapam caps did really well. The Strike 60 treatments did well. The combination did well. All those treatments were adequate to really improve the plant performance at these locations. So we're going to shift gears here. We're going to talk about some bed fumigation experiments that we did. We've talked about bed fumigation in the past. One of the main differences that we have now is that Trident has an excellent commercial rig that they've been using, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen their rig out in the fields. They make really large beds, about 14 inches high. The benefits of bed fumigation, as we've talked about a lot of times before, are that you're only using fumigant in the bed, so you're using less fumigant. You get the benefit of reduced buffers, whether you use a tarp or you don't use a tarp, because of the way the EPA calculates those. Your low fumigant usage often translates into a lower fumigation cost as well. This is just a little sketch of where the nematodes are in the existing planting. You can see they're in the bed, they're in the ground below the bed, and you knock the beds down, prep for fumigation. And then when you make the beds, you're scraping soil from the upper regions of the soil, and you're fumigating that with your shanks. The red lines here are showing about where the shanks are. The typical placement for this rig is about 16 inches deep. So we tried that typical placement. We also tried just a couple inches deeper. Now, 2 inches deeper doesn't seem like very much, but when you factor in that the beds are about 14 inches high, what it means is it's the difference between the shank being about 2 inches below grade and the shank being about 4 inches below grade. And we'll get to the importance of that in just a little bit. This is the layout for the treatment. We had 8 beds in the treatment. 4 of them were fumigated with Strike 60. The other 4 were with C35. And we've got the rates down there for you. So you can see that in the Strike 60 treated plots, that's the green one, there's a lot of chlorpicrin in there. So that should be really good for disease control. On the other hand, in the C35 fumed beds, there's a lot of 1,3-D there. Should be really heavy for nematode control. We have each of those comparisons going. In one region of the beds where they're non-tarped, which is the standard practice, one region of the beds in which we have the non-tarped but deeper shanks, which I talked about earlier, and one region in which we put on a TIF tarp. It's a really high quality tarp, similar to what California strawberry growers use. It's a 5-layer tarp. It's over 1 mil thick. It runs very well through mulch layers, and it will hold up in a field for at least 18 months. Nematode data.
All right, nematode data from this trial. I think we're doing okay. So the top graph are soil populations, nematodes per 50 grams of soil. You probably in your report see it on a 250 cc basis, so you just multiply that by 5. And in the bottom are per gram of dry root. And so we've talked about this before. I've looked at a lot of samples from up here. And the second comment that I have up here, roots do tell you a lot better story about what's going on with root lesion nematode. That's where the nematode prefers to be most of the time. So we'll focus on the root data. 3 different sampling times: fall 2018, that's a year after fumigation; spring a year and a half, and then fall 2019 is 2 years after fumigation. Looking at non-tarp deep with C35 and strike 60. And I just wanted to make a quick comment. This global shortage of telone no longer exists. I spoke with company reps and they're back up and running, and there's plenty of 1,3-D available globally. So it's pretty obvious what's going on here. And, you know, Tom and I have showed this before. Tarps are great. If you can afford a tarp and put a tarp down and use it in conjunction with bed fumigation, it gives you excellent nematode suppression. And that's shown here on the tarp normal. You'll see even going out 2 years after fumigation, there's virtually no nematodes. The other thing to notice is that, and we expected this, C35 provides better nematode control than strike 60. 1,3-D is a nematicide. Chloropicrin is a fungicide. So you would expect to have these kind of results. And then just quickly, Jerry Weiland was part of this study as well. I'm showing some data from some plating that he did from these soils looking at Pythium. And I want to point out, we wanted to look at Phytophthora rubi, the causative agent of raspberry root rot. And you see Tom and I holding a bunch of nylon stockings full of soil. We did bury the pathogen in the field, but we weren't able to recover it. So when we're looking at the Pythium numbers, we'd like to think that we could translate that to potential suppression of Phytophthora root rot. And again, it's the same kind of message that you saw with the nematodes. Tarps are awesome. Tarps, and you'll see here, this is laid out. These are over time with the different treatments that we looked at, and the ones with the lowest bars are the ones where the fumigants were applied under a tarp. And back to Tom.
So we also got some improved weed control under the tarps, which you'd expect, right? Because you're blocking out the sun, so you're blocking out a lot of those annual weeds. These tarps didn't stay on the beds. Uh-oh, that's our 12-minute timer. All right. These tarps didn't stay on the beds. They came off before planting. So the weed control that we got was a benefit from the tarps at the time of fumigation and during the winter after the fumigation. So we did get a big reduction in annual weeds compared to the non-tarped plots. Also interesting is that in the deep shanked non-tarped, where we looked like we got better nematode control, we also seem to get better weed control there as well. In early 2019, we took a look at the dormant primocanes that were by then tied up onto the towers, and you could see that we had a big difference in the numbers of primocanes that reached the top wire and in the diameter of the tower at the top wire. And again, the tarps made a big difference. Once again, this is not a benefit of the tarps after planting, the way Juan was talking about. This is a benefit of the tarps only during the time of fumigation. You would probably get even more growth if you left those tarps on. And that we could still see that benefit of the tarps in July of this last year, almost 2 years after the fumigation. You can see in this lower graph here that the cane height is much higher when you've got the tarps in place at fumigation. So that's about it for those two experiments. And I guess the bottom lines that we have is caps work really well, tarps work really well.
Hi. You know, I'm still kind of flabbergasted as you tarp the row, but you know how the nematodes got into my field, I don't know. But the area that I don't fumigate, if I did it in a row fumigation, is it how long them little buggers take to get over to the row that I don't want them in.
Yeah. Do you want to handle it? Okay. So Daryl, I get your question is that how long does it take those nematodes to come in, right?
Right.
And I think the answer from this trial And from the other trials that we did back around 2010 were that it looks like it takes at least 2 years, because in this trial and in all the earlier trials that we did, the nematodes came into the beds much faster if they weren't tarped than if they were tarped. So what was happening is that it looked like it's more of a function of how well you get rid of the nematodes in the bed than it is what do you do in the alleyways. We don't have the numbers here, but we also took samples from the alleyways, and we had very few nematodes in the alleyways. They just don't live there very well.
One funny part is that in the tarpon, in the test that you did at my place, is that I use quite a bit of separated manure, you know, and boy, do the mice love to go in there. Man, I was surprised at how in the world, where's these nematodes going when these mice can find that place right away?
Yeah, the mice are a factor, and we didn't run into that here. We had these tarps on a short time and just late in the year, but yeah, I think it would probably be just like ground cloth. The mice would be a factor. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.